You're going to have setbacks, and that's okay. Keep going. That's the only way we're going to accomplish things.
Step into the world of success with Your Brand Amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I am thrilled that the day is here when I get to interview somebody who knows a lot about leadership, and I get to thank him virtually in person for all of his service to our country and his leadership with our country. I'm really excited. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch, aka Oak. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. We connected a while ago on LinkedIn, and we've been talking about this and finally making it happen. So good.
Yes. Well, I'm really happy that we're here. I'd love to talk a little bit about your background, all of your years of service. You have a book, you're a keynote speaker. So going from being active duty to today, what has that transition been like? What were the aha moments that you had in your roles before that led you on your path today?
Yeah. So I always tell people I was lucky. As a kid, I started down this path of leadership. I played baseball, basketball, football, and was the captain of my teams. And I got lucky enough, I was the student government president and class president. So got introduced early to leadership and got introduced about that time in high school to the servant leadership style, which is what I believe in, by two outstanding gentlemen. One was my history teacher. And no doubt about it, he's the reason I majored in history in college. And I stayed in contact with him all these years until about a year and a half ago when he died. And then my high school basketball coach, who I still stay in contact with, they were both servant leaders. And they both, they understood, my history teacher understood it. His job was to teach history in school, but it was also same thing with my basketball coach, put together a good basketball team, but also to help develop young men and women into good young men and women that were going to be productive members of society, be good husbands, good wives, good fathers, mothers, and their door was always open. If you had a problem, you could go in, sit down, talk to them, and they would give you some advice, point you in the right direction, whatever it was you needed at that point. So I was lucky that way. I got started on the right foot. And then I had some outstanding servant leaders in the Army, also had some very poor leaders in the Army, but you learn just as much from them as you do from somebody that's good. I've been adamant throughout my career that even if I have somebody who's doing something wrong, I can learn from that. I can learn what I don't want to do or what I will never do. And that's just as important as figuring out what you are going to do. So I've been lucky throughout my career. And like I told you before, I wouldn't trade any of it. It was an honor to serve the people of this country. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the idea of servant leadership. It's something that I also strongly believe in. And I honestly don't feel that there's enough of it modeled in the world today. We see a lot of fighting. We see a lot of mudslinging, but we don't see people who want to truly be leaders, who are going to be empathetic, who are going to have an open door policy like your mentors did, and who want to really show people a path towards being the best, right? Inspire that in them.
Right. Not just the best worker, but the best person they can be. Because that's a leader's job as well, is to help develop people that they have the privilege to lead. And it is a privilege to be the leader. And unfortunately, too many leaders today have forgotten that it is a privilege. Part of your job is to help develop them as a person, if they're willing and want that piece of it. So I agree with you. I think we absolutely don't have enough servant leaders in this world. To me, servant leadership is really simple. I was lucky. I had my hand in commissioning over 600 lieutenants in the Army over my 16 years of working with ROTC programs. 3 of them was my program that I ran, and then 13 as a recruiter for one of the Army ROTC programs here in Florida. And I used to tell every single one of them as often as I could, leadership is about selfless service, period. It's not about you, and yet it's all about you. And I'd always get somebody who'd say, well, Colonel McCulloch, how can it not be about me and be all about me? And I said, well, it's not about you and the title you get or the privileges you get or that you're going to get better pay and live in a nicer house and get to drive a nicer car. Okay, leaders get those things, you generally, and that's okay, as long as that's not the only reason you want to be the leader. If that's the only reason you want to be the leader, please go do something else because you're never going to be a good one. It's all about you and how you empower and teach the people that you have the privilege to lead and how you run the organization that you have the privilege to lead. That's what leadership is about. And, I also always get people say, well, I don't want to be a servant leader because I don't want people to walk all over me. I said, you've known me for a couple minutes here. You think people walk all over me? That's not what servant leadership is. Servant leadership means that when you make a decision, you still have to accomplish your goal. You still have to accomplish your mission, your task, whatever it is, and make a profit if you're in the business world. You got to do those things. But when you make decisions, you take the people that you're leading into account. How is it going to affect them? You still got to hold them to a standard. You still got to hold them accountable. I'm not saying that it's always going to be roses because you got to hold people accountable, but you take their situation into account. That's what servant leadership is about to me.
Yeah. Well, and I do teach university. I teach grad school. I also work in nonprofit. And those are two places where I think we do see more examples, perhaps, of servant leadership, right? For my students, I'm very honest about my career trajectory has been all over the place. And here's where we're at now. And I'm going to help develop you. I'm going to have open office hours. Some students know a lot about the subject matter, digital media. Some don't know anything about it before they start their master's. So I want to meet them where they are and say, oh, you know what? A lot of people are asking about this. Let's have a special Saturday session so we can dive even deeper because I don't have enough time to fit it all in this 90-minute period once a week, right? Or for nonprofits, we see that where it really is about community building. So I think it's just interesting because those are businesses, right? But when you think about the world of corporate, we don't always see that servant leadership heart come through. We do see more of that competition over collaboration, perhaps. So what are some things that people who are listening right now should think about of ways that they can, move into servant leadership? What are some things they should look for that they're not doing? And then what are some steps they can take to, create this better life for themselves and for the people who work with or for them?
Yeah, that's a great point, Annika. It really is. It makes the workplace much more pleasant. It really does. And much more productive. I believe that 100%. So I think there's a couple things. I think part of the problem is that we let our ego get to us. And we all have an ego. And we want people to have an ego because that's what drives them to be successful. That's what drives them to be the best at whatever it is they do. And we want that. But good leaders, especially servant leaders, but any good leader knows when to put that ego aside because you don't have all the answers. You don't have all the knowledge. You don't have all the skills, I promise you. And I learned that as a lieutenant. I'm a brand new lieutenant, 24 years old, take over my platoon. Walk in there the first day, my platoon sergeant, senior NCO, Sergeant First Class Pinson. I remember him like it was yesterday. 6'5", 250-pound country boy from Mississippi. Calls me in. We sit down underneath the tree and we're having lunch. And he said, an MRE lunch. And he says to me, he said, sir, you're the lieutenant. You're in charge. We'll do things any way you want to do them. He said, however, I've been in the Army for 23 years. He'd been in the Army almost as long as I'd been alive. And I've seen it done every which way you can imagine. If you're messing up, I'm going to tell you. If you still want to do it that way, then we'll do it that way. You're the boss. But I'm going to tell you. And I give him credit for helping to develop me into the leader that I became. Because why would you not listen to somebody like that? The reason you don't is because you let your ego get the best of you. And you think that you got all the answers. So learn to put your ego aside. You got it. You got one, and we want you to have one. But there are times you got to put it aside. Number two, I think one of the problems that I see that prevents people from being a servant leader is that they, as a leader, just from your title and your position, you're going to have authority. Good leaders, and certainly servant leaders, give that authority away when they assign a project. If I assign you a project, then I got to give you the authority to make it happen. Or how are you going to do that? Generally, that's when it becomes micromanaging. If a good leader doesn't give authority away when they assign things, then they have to be involved to the point where they're, in my opinion, micromanaging things. But give them that authority to make it happen. And after the project's done, you can always take that authority back and give it to the next person that you give a project to. But don't be afraid to give them that authority. I had a boss one time who retired, a 4-star general, so obviously way smarter than me. And he said to me, Oak, leadership is on a scale. He said, on this end of the scale, you have that authoritarian micromanaging. Do it exactly as I tell you to do it. And he said, and no creativity happens there, because nobody's going to stick their neck out. They're just going to sit there and wait for you to tell them exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Why would they have any original thought? On the other end of the scale, you have Attila the Hun and chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos. And you want to be as far toward chaos as you feel comfortable. He said, because that's where creativity happens. That's where you're using other people's skills, other people's knowledge, other people's ability. And he said, the way you get there is very simple. He said, you build a culture and make sure everybody understands what that culture is, so that when they make decisions, you know they're going to make it inside of your culture, what you allow and don't allow. You train them to a standard, so you know they can do what you're asking them to do. You give them the resources, whatever that is, time, money, people, equipment, and then you give them the authority to make it happen. And then you get out of their way. Will they do it the same way you would have done it? Probably not. Who cares? The analogy I always use for that is, we got to get to the number 9. How do I care how you get me there? 7 plus 2 is 9, but so is 6 plus 3, and 5 plus 4, and 8 plus 1. I don't care how you get me there. Stay within the culture, stay within your left and right limits, make the decisions. Now, that doesn't mean that I wash my hands of it, because as the leader, you're responsible for everything that does or doesn't happen in your organization, or at least you should be. So you're available to give them more resources, give them some advice. And, one of the tools I always use when somebody would come up and they'd be stuck and they'd say, well, I can't figure this out. I'd say, okay, I still wouldn't tell them how to do it. I'd say, okay, here's 3 ways I've seen it done in the past. You figure out what works for you. So let them do things. Give them the authority to make things happen and let them do it. And you'll be absolutely astonished at not only what they'll come up with, but how much more productivity you'll have in your organization.
I feel that so deeply, because I had to go through that and realize, and this was when I was younger as well, but it was really interesting to go through the process of going, if we try to take on everything and do it ourselves, doesn't matter if we have the skill set and we're really good at that thing. If we don't put people in positions where they feel empowered, where they feel like they are learning to be leaders, it just doesn't work. It all falls apart, because
it does.
You can't juggle all the balls. You just need to do what you do. And it is hard to give up control and just let people do it a completely different way than you would. But to your point, it gets done. It gets done well. Maybe they have different ideas that you didn't even consider. And it's actually turns out even better than it would have been.
At times, I guarantee you, they'll do a better job than you would have done.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's happened to me. I had an idea how I would have done it. I watched them do it, and they did it a smarter, better way than I would have done it. So you just got to trust them. Trust your people.
Mm-hmm.
You hired them, or you've continued to let them work for you. You've trained them, so trust them, and you'll be absolutely astonished at what they can do for you. But we've all worked for that on that other end of the scale, and it isn't fun. Nobody has fun at work. It's painful is what it is. And the problem, again, I had a boss who told me one day, he said, leaders need to do what leaders have to do. Everything else you delegate and you assign to other people, and you give them the authority to make it happen, but you let them do that. That's part of their training. Because leaders, every leader, I don't care who you are and what position you're in, Someday you are going to leave that position. You're either going to get fired, you're going to quit, you're going to get promoted, or you're going to die. But you are going to leave that position, I promise. If you haven't done a good job of helping create that next generation of leaders that's going to come up and take your place, shame on you. Shame on you.
Yeah. One of the other situations I'm thinking about is that phrase, go fast, go alone, right? If you slow down, sometimes I've had this situation occur as well when I was the next person who was going to go into the leadership position in the next year, an organization. And we were trying to make some major changes. And, these had been in our strategic planning process. Most people were excited about the changes, but the current president was a little more reticent. There were a lot of people who didn't really understand it. And so that was a point when I and the board members, the majority of the board members, could have pushed it through, but it was causing so much tension. I had to take a step back from my own ego and go, okay, let's have a great rest of the year. Let's step back. I'll revisit this next year. And
That's
then
right.
that also gave more time for people to really understand what we were trying to do, to ask all the questions. So
to let those seeds grow.
Included.
Yeah, to let those seeds grow. Absolutely.
That was a very pivotal moment where, and those experiences really transformed me from not really understanding how to be a manager or a leader into understanding what it would take to be that leader, to be that servant leader, to make sure everybody felt like they had a role, they felt comfortable with their roles, and that they were inspired.
Yeah, and that they were a valued member of the team, which is huge. And I love the, go slow, go, get everybody, go fast, go alone. In the Army, we use the term slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Oh. So, just make sure it's moving in the right direction, but you don't have to go fast. And part of that, like you're talking about, is that you can push things through, but if everybody's not on board, then it's going to be rocky, it's going to be rough, it's not going to be as good as it could be. So take the time to plant the seeds, let them grow, answer questions. That's one of the things I've figured out is that especially the younger generation today wants to know why. When I was a young lieutenant and somebody told me to do something, unless it was unlawful, illegal, or immoral, I never asked the question why. I did my job. Mm-hmm. This generation wants to know why. Nothing wrong with that. It just took a couple years for this old man to figure out there's something wrong with that. Mm-hmm. What I figured out is if you can convince them of the why, you got them. Yeah. They'll do whatever you ask them to do, but they want to know why. So when you're thinking through your process of your vision, your plan, and your culture, make sure you understand not only what you want to do, but why you want to do it and be able to communicate it to the people who you lead. Because if you think as a leader, you're the one that's going to get that organization where you want it to be 5 years from now, you're sadly mistaken. It's not you. It's the people you're leading who are going to get you there. And if they don't understand where you want to go, then how can they help get you there?
Yeah. Well, this makes me think of your book and a topic you speak on a lot as a keynote speaker, your leadership legacy, becoming the leader you're meant to be. We've talked about servant leadership, but let's talk about legacy. How does that play into leadership?
Yeah. Well, I think that's any good leader is thinking about their legacy, not so much as for their ego, but again, you're going to leave at some point. So you've got to start preparing people at the lower levels to move up because everybody's moving up or everybody's going to leave eventually. So you got to be able to fill those positions. So to me, your legacy is two parts. Very small part is what you actually accomplish as the leader of that organization. Now that's important. In the real world, results do matter. So you got to accomplish something. But if you tie your legacy to what you accomplished and what you did in that organization, when the next leader comes in and changes everything, then where is your legacy? So it's important and that needs to be taken care of, but that's not what your legacy is. Your legacy is that next generation of leaders that you help create in your, servant leadership style. And then they'll create the next generation of leaders and they'll create the next generation of leaders. And that's your legacy. And that really came home to me. I always felt that way, but it really came to the ahead when I was running my ROTC program at the University of South Alabama in Mobile. And I had a guy who worked for me. And I say he worked for me. He was probably a better leader than I am. Master Sergeant David Powell was my senior NCO. And one day we were talking about the significance of what we were doing, creating that next generation of leaders, not only for the Army, but for the nation. And he looked over at me and he said, "Sir, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations." And I thought, oh, what a powerful quote. Well, I wish I could take credit for that, but I can't. It's Master Sergeant David Powell, who I still stay in contact with today. But you know what the most powerful part of that quote is? That you can take the word nations, you can substitute anything you want for it. A university, a hospital, a food bank, a business, whatever you want. Because every organization in every profession at every level needs to have good leaders. That is what determines whether an organization is going to be successful or not, is the quality of leadership.
What was the impetus behind deciding to write a book and to then become a keynote speaker when, after all of your years of leadership, you could have just retired in the sunset and just, gone fishing or just enjoyed life?
I've had plenty of my buddies here in Daytona because I love to fish. And they said, "Oh, what are you doing? Why are you flying all over the world talking when you could just go fishing every day?" And I said, "I can't. I look at it as my responsibility to pass on some of these lessons that I learned over the last 40 years as a leader. Because if I don't do it, then who's going to do it?" And I do look at it. It's not only is it my passion at this point in my life, but I look at it as my responsibility to do so. And so I try to talk to as many people as I can. So I've always thought, at least for the last 20 years, I thought I wanted to write this book. And I always thought, well, I'll do it. And I just never got around to it. Then one day, my wife and I and her mom, we live in a condo here in Daytona, and her mom at that point lived in the condo as well. And then two other people that live in the condo. We went to this event at our Catholic church that was kind of a motivational / how do we revitalize the Catholic Church? And it was a 3-hour-long event, and the keynote speaker was unbelievable. Great keynote speaker, Jonathan Fanning. If you ever get a chance to hear him speak, absolutely worth your time. And he didn't speak all 3 hours. He spoke for like 40 minutes and then took a break, and then he'd come back in another 40 minutes and then took a break and then another 40 minutes. And every time he took a break, I went up and picked his brain because he was doing what I wanted to do. He was talking about, motivation and leadership and all those kinds of things. And he gave me all kinds of great advice I still use today. And then at the very end, after he finished the third 40-minute session and he was getting ready to leave, I went up and I thanked him, and, we said our goodbyes. And as he turned around to walk away, he turned back around and he said, "Oak, have you written a book?" And I said, "No, but I'm thinking about it." And he said, "Stop thinking about it and write it." I said, "Okay." So I went home. That was the 15th of February, 2020. I went home that night, wrote out the table of contents, and I started writing the next day. And I published that book on the 12th of February, 2021. And now I'm working on my second book, which will be about success, some ways to help improve your chances of being successful, not only at work, but as a person. Because again, that's huge to me. I think we got to do it. A person isn't just somebody at work. They have a family. They have a life outside of work, and we need to help make them successful everywhere. Because the more successful they are at home, the more successful they're going to be at work. I believe that. And I've seen the opposite. If they're not successful at home, they're not going to be good at work. So that's what drove me to finally write the book. And then once I wrote the book, I've been a public speaker for 30 years because they always want, as an officer, they always want you to come speak at Veterans Day, Memorial Day, Flag Day, whatever. And so I always did. I always loved doing it, but I never got paid for it besides what the Army was paying me. And then after I wrote my book, people actually, and they read it, they actually wanted me to come speak at their conferences, to their company, wherever. And so now that's what I do. I go around, do keynote talks on leadership and success. And like I said, I'm writing my second book, and that's really it's my passion right now. So
there are two things that you mentioned when you sent all of your information so that I could figure out how our conversation was going to flow. One thing, and you've spoken about it a lot, is mentorship and why that's important. And then also professional development. So I'd love to hear a little bit more on both of those. And, can you develop yourself to your full potential without those?
No, I don't believe you can. Yeah. Become good, but will you be as good as you could have been? I don't believe so. So one of the things I always tell people is have a mentor, be a mentor. And I said that at a conference one time. A bunch of police chiefs were there, and somebody in the back of the room shouted out to me, "I'm the highest person in my organization. I don't have anybody to be a mentor for me." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Look around this room. How many other police chiefs are there in this room?" I said, somebody to be a mentor to you does not have to be in your organization. In fact, they don't even have to be in your profession. And I encourage people to have mentors who are not in their profession, because everybody in your profession looks at things just like this. You've all been trained the same way. You're all grown up in the same culture. You deal with the same things day in and day out. Everybody looking at things with blinders on. Go outside your profession, and now you got somebody who's looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, and you'll get all kinds of ideas that are outside the box that will work. You just never thought of it, because why would you? That's not in the culture that you've been taught. So you got to have a mentor. If you don't have one, go find one. I promise you there is somebody who would love to be your mentor. The only thing that is required for somebody to be your mentor is they got to have some type of knowledge or experience or ability that you need. They got to be willing to do it, and you got to trust them. Those are the only three things that are required for somebody to be your mentor. So go find somebody you trust who has something that you want, a knowledge, skill, ability, and ask them if they'll be your mentor. And I promise you, you'll be amazed how many people would love to be your mentor. Then, as a leader, you must mentor other people. When I go around and I ask leaders at a conference, who are you mentoring? And they tell me nobody. I say, shame on you. Somebody helped you get this far in life. It's your job now to pass it on to that next generation, that next group of leaders, to help them be as successful as they can. So you got to have a mentor, and you got to be a mentor. Absolutely. Then the professional development part and the leadership development part, it absolutely astonishes me how many companies out there and organizations do not have a professional development or a leadership development program. And I tell them, you're just hurting yourself. First of all, even if somebody, and everybody needs to be involved in it, not just your current leaders, you need to allow everybody to be a part of it, because somebody who isn't a leader today may be someday, either in your organization or somewhere else, but that's okay. I always tell them, if you don't have those programs, then you're hurting yourself, because you're not making the people in your organization the best. And here's the other way. If I'm an 18-year-old young man and I come to your organization and I have aspirations to be a leader someday, and you're not showing me a path for me to get there, I'm going somewhere else. So you're losing your top talent to somebody else because you didn't take the time and a little bit of money and a little bit of effort to have a leadership development and a professional development program.
Yeah. Wow. We talked about micromanagement and how we need to let people have the opportunity to lead and manage their own projects. We talked about your mentors and how important they've been to your life and your growth and where you are, who you are today. We've talked about legacy and what that really looks like and means, right? What I love about that is you always want to respect the past, but make the improvements you can, right? And as part of your legacy, you can't be worried.
Every single leader, if it isn't in your DNA to leave that organization better than you got it, then you don't have any business being a leader. Because that's one of the major jobs as a leader, is to leave that organization better than you took it over.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes being a leader can also mean understanding that this organization isn't where you're supposed to be and being willing to take the hard step of walking away, even if you're not going to have the income, you're not going to have that title, whatever the case may be.
That's right. Again, it goes back to put your ego aside. If you aren't the right person for that organization, or that organization isn't the right person for you, then go find the one that is. Not only will your life be more pleasant, you'll enjoy life and you'll enjoy going to work in the morning, but you won't bring that organization to where it needs to be if you're not the right person for that organization. So don't be selfish. Go find the right organization and let somebody else who's a better fit for that organization do that. And, you're right. It may mean that you take a pay raise or you don't have the title that you had, but that isn't what life's about.
So, Oak, you're writing your second book. When do you anticipate that coming out?
Oh, I don't know. I don't. It is another keynote talk that I give. So the words are in there. I just got to get it out on paper. Because that's how the first book came about, was, that leadership talk. I've been giving that for years and years and years. And so I just, but obviously you put more in a book than you can in a 1 hour or hour and a half talk. So it took me a little bit of time, but I'm starting to figure out what it is, how I want to put it down on paper. I would like to have it out by the end of the year. We'll see if I can make that happen or not.
What are some other things that you have on your radar that you're planning to do this upcoming year? Are you traveling the globe for speaking engagements? Are you hoping to get more of them? Are you doing any trainings besides the keynotes with the material from your book and your leadership talks?
Yeah, so I've done training with 2 companies, one in Louisiana and one in Pittsburgh. And I'm talking to right now 3 companies to do that with them. One in California, up near the Sacramento area. Then one and then 2 in Ohio. One is a construction company and one is a bank. So I'm hoping to get those. And then I do have some speaking engagements planned. I was in San Antonio, Texas last week. Next week I'll be in Atlantic Beach, which is North Jacksonville. Then the next month I'll be in Miami. Then I'll be in Springfield, Massachusetts. I'll be in London in June speaking. So always looking for more speaking engagements. Because again, as we talked earlier, I've got 4 ways to get this message out to people. I've got my keynote talk. I've got my book. I've got my social media, which is how we connected on LinkedIn. And then I've got these podcasts that I've been on to pass my message along. And I'm just trying to use all 4 as much as I can.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask about the podcast aspect. When did you discover podcasting as a potential medium for yourself to help spread your message more widely?
Yeah, it was funny because I didn't even think about podcasts. There was a guy in Lakeland who it's about 2 hours away from me here in Florida on the other side of Orlando. And he was just starting a podcast and he heard me speak and asked me if he contacted me on LinkedIn again and said, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? Yes. I said, absolutely. Love to do it. And he said, I'm just starting it. You'll be my 3rd guest. He said, I don't have a lot of followers. I said, I don't care. I said, if we help one person, it was worth my time, because that's what this is about. And so that was my first podcast. And now I think you are my 217th podcast.
Oh my gosh.
I've been
wow. Fantastic.
all over the world. I've been on podcasts in India, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Bulgaria, Romania, Poland. It's amazing. And I love the connection that I get to do. And I've actually had the privilege of meeting in person 22 of the people that I was on their show. They lived somewhere near where I was speaking, and they took the effort to if they wanted to, I got them in so they could hear me talk. But otherwise we'd meet after the talk or whatever for a coffee or a beer or whatever.
Nice. Amazing.
It's always nice to meet somebody in person once you
absolutely.
On social media and Zoom and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had a really enriching, robust career in your second career, right? Helping people really learn what it means to be a servant leader. So we will share your website in the show notes so that everybody can click through, find all the information about you, your book, your keynote speaking, the episodes of of my podcast, hopefully, and others that you've been on. Yeah. And I always like to ask, do you have one last piece of advice for somebody who's really doing some soul searching and realizing, ooh, I might not be as good of a leader as I think I am, or, oh, I am a decent leader, but I can improve.
Yeah. I always tell people two things. One, go back to your values.
Mm-hmm.
Because it all starts there. As a leader, you've got to be true to your values. That's what makes you authentic. That's what makes you a leader of character, of integrity, those kinds of things. And number two, that goes back to, in my opinion, servant leadership and making people better. I always tell people your goal should be to go out and do one positive thing for somebody every day. Because as a leader, you are going to make a difference in somebody's life every day, almost guaranteed. Why not make a conscious decision to make a positive difference in somebody's life? And I think just imagine the ripple effect. If everybody went out and made one positive difference in one person's life every day, imagine how much better our families, our neighborhoods, our communities, our cities, our towns, our state, our country, the world would be if everybody did that.
Amazing. And do you have a favorite quote, family motto, verse, poem that keeps you going every day?
Yeah. Besides the one that I gave that Matt started David Powell, one of my favorite poems is If by Kipling, because it really does explain that, life is tough and you're going to have some setbacks. Have the self-discipline and the motivation to get yourself up and dust yourself off and keep going. The other one is Teddy Roosevelt's The Man in the Arena. So either one of those two kind of reminds you that you're going to have setbacks and that's okay. Keep going. That's the only way we're going to accomplish things.
Amazing. Oak, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a long time coming, but it's coming at the perfect time. Is what I always say is like, this is exactly when you're supposed to be here, when I'm supposed to be here with you, and getting this message out to everybody to help them stay inspired or get inspired to be that best leader, to be that servant leader, to see how you can continue to impact people positively, whether in your personal life or your world of work.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on the show. I loved it and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's watching this episode or listening to it on your favorite platform. Don't forget to check out the show notes for the link to retired Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch's website, aka Oak, and click through and learn more about him and pick up his book and see where he's going to speak. Is he speaking anywhere near you? With that, have a beautiful day. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.